We are good, Vinu.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining us and today it's GS Lab Gab's webinar session on focusing on med devices and pharma manufacturing, especially with their supply chains and manufacturing. Uh, the topic has been unlocking hidden efficiencies in med device and pharma manufacturing and supply chain with AI and Gen AI. But while the promise of these technologies transforming the way manufacturing and supply chain is going to be working after their adoption. There have been enough and more webinars and papers on use cases and potential priorities. We want to take a step back in this and also focus on what's realistically feasible. So in this webinar, while we will be talking about where cutting-edge AI, ML, and generative AI technologies can address real issues, be it demand forecasting or inventory optimization or risk management or simply any logistics routing capabilities. We also want to look at what are the burning organizational challenges, especially operational challenges that manufacturers and supply chain leaders face today. And we want to take a look at how organizations can get ready for this change from a business functions point of view, IT infrastructure readiness point of view, and people point of view to embrace these transformative technologies. And it reminds me of one of Gartner's talks, probably the first time they talked about the adoption model as an immaturity model rather than a maturity model, because things are changing so fast that there is a certain level of immaturity in adoption and in the because of the number of variables and how fast things are moving here, considering that we wanted to focus on actual readiness and challenges. And we have two of our distinguished folks here, clients, and who we know have worked in the space from a readiness point of view and actually worked on adopting some of these capabilities in their organizations. Let me first introduce Mike LaRusso, CIO and Head of Shared Services at Embecta. Mike has served as the CIO and Head of Shared Services, and in his role, he has been accountable for global information technology, information security, the shared services model, and facilities management. Prior to joining Embecta, Mike had served with Becton Dickinson, BD, as their Senior Vice President, interim CIO at BD. He's had several roles at BD, which included IT, business relationship management, and has also worked globally in the Middle East and Latin America and Asian regions. Prior to BD, he was Senior Vice President at JP Morgan Chase. He was part of the manufacturing execution systems programs at General Electric. Interestingly, Mike has served our country in the Navy, and his last rank was Lieutenant Commander. Mike has an MBA from Rhode Island University, Bachelor of Science Mechanical from RPI, and is a GE certified Six Sigma black belt. Joe Butcher, director at Merck. He's the director of digital strategy and product delivery for Merck's digital manufacturing division. Over his 8-year tenure at Merck, he has held various roles across finance, strategy, and he's done a lot of work in the supply chain and logistics space as being part of manufacturing. Prior to Merck, Joe was a Marine Corps logistics officer. He actually handled logistic operations advisory roles, especially during his deployment in Iraq, and he spent advising Iraq's Marine Corps. Joe is married, 2 children, huge supporter of youth sports. He currently leads the youth wrestling program in his hometown. Joe comes with a BS in quantitative economics from the U.S. Naval Academy. He has an MBA from Wharton and is a Master of Science graduate in data sciences from the University of Berkeley. I think between the two of them, yes, they both served as veterans from the Navy. I think they come from 2 different facets, and I think they complement each other in this webinar. Mike comes from the med devices space. Joe comes from pharma. Mike, as CIO of IT infrastructure management, is responsible for getting the infrastructure ready for such transformative changes. And Joe has actually worked very closely with his business counterparts and has actually implemented some of has brought in a lot of AI implementations for actual business adoption. So I think it's great to have the two of them complementary in experience and expertise. And thank you so much, Mike and Joe, for joining us. For the attendees, I just want to let you know that we will have a Q&A session at the end of in the last 15 minutes, and feel free to drop in your questions and we'll pick it up appropriately for our panelists to answer. Thank you so much. I let Mike start first. On to you,
Sure.
Mike.
All right. Thanks, Vinod, and welcome everybody. Glad to be here and talking about this topic. So, as Vinod said, Embecta is a spinoff from BD, Becton Dickinson. We've been spun off a little over 2 years now, and as I kind of talk through this topic, it's important to note that we're very much at the beginning of our journey here, especially as it pertains to to implementing AI. So you'll probably hear a bit more concrete examples from Joe. But one of the things I'm going to focus on today are sort of how we're getting ready to be able to to harness the benefits of AI and then Gen AI as well. So just a little bit about how we spun off Embecta to give you some context. When we came out of BD, from an IT perspective, we took no human resources that conveyed to the company from either IT or, largely speaking, from shared services. So we had to basically stand up a full IT capability and a shared services capability. And when I speak of shared services, I'm talking back-end processes, finance, procurement, order management, customer service, et cetera. So from a system and a process perspective, we were largely a greenfield opportunity. So, as it pertains to, today's topic, I would say as a mostly greenfield opportunity, we can really seize on, I would say, two advantages. The only legacy technical debt we really have to speak of exists within the manufacturing plants that conveyed with the spinoff, where we've inherited a plethora of local systems, not uncommon across our industry. We run 3 manufacturing plants in 3 different countries. So that's actually one advantage to seize on, is we've instituted all new enterprise level systems. And for the most part, we've designed and implemented them with the future in mind and trying to leapfrog ourselves into a position to be able to take advantage of advanced technologies. So that's one advantage. The other advantage, and I'll kind of focus on supply chain in particular for today, is we've gone from a mixed model, I would say, on the logistics side to a 3PL model, fully using global partners across our landscape. So we again there have an advantage that we can focus our efforts in supply chain areas other than logistics and distribution. So think things upstream like supply chain planning or order fulfillment, et cetera. And this is key because, again, trying to solve multiple problems across the entire scope of the process, or an entire function like supply chain can dilute, the ability to execute. So, just my point of view regarding, AI and Gen AI, as you can read in Gartner, it is at the peak of the hype cycle, which is kind of that period of inflated expectations. I think it's going to hang there for a while. People are just getting their heads around AI, and the understanding and application of Gen AI to me is still in its infancy. There's also multiple collaborations going on, in the Gen AI arena. In some cases, hard to keep them straight. For Embecta as an SAP S/4 shop, we're watching certain things closely, like the evolution of Joule, especially in the area of supply chain planning. And for those that are unaware, Joule is it was unveiled at SAP Sapphire about 2 weeks ago by Christian Klein. It's based on a collaboration with IBM. So, and I'll just finish my opening comments with the age-old topic of data, and that's mostly what you're going to hear from me today. Data, probably the easiest concept for us to understand, yet the most elusive to tackle. As one of my team members always reminds me, AI should stand for augmented intelligence. And, why? Because there's always going to be a need for human context, particularly around source data and also providing litmus tests for AI or Gen AI output. Data more so than ever is the golden asset. It's actually always been the golden asset, but it becomes more and more important as we consider these advanced technologies. And data provenance is key. You must go for trusted sources of data. This is very, very important because in our world today, there's data that you're going to use that you haven't originated. You're going to be plugging in different data sources in order to drive the decisions and the efficiency that you need. So really focusing on where that data is coming from and how it's protected is crucial to harnessing the value of AI and Gen AI. I've not yet seen one published, but we should all be aware and probably appropriately concerned about what the curve of data growth versus data quality looks like, because data sources and data growth is growing exponentially, but I haven't yet really seen a good picture of what that means to true data quality. And in the end, ultimately the technology is the sexy part and the data governance is not, but you can't really have one without the other. So Vinod, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Hey, thanks, Mike. I have a few questions on that, but I'll probably come back a
That's
little
fine.
later, probably along with the Q&A session. But thank you so much. Joe, your turn, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks, Vinod, for having me. Very excited to be here. And thanks, Mike, for being my co-panelist here. It's always great kind of being on with a fellow veteran and with another leader in the broader healthcare space. So very excited for the session. So couldn't agree with you more, Mike. I mean, it's actually what I spent most of my morning talking about with the team. So on the current application that we're building, so much comes back to data quality and kind of how we're approaching data. So very solid point. So as Vinod mentioned in terms of my role, so my role is kind of split into two pieces, one on kind of the digital strategy and the second on actual product delivery and more of the kind of execution side of things for AI and other sorts of digital and analytics applications. So I'm going to quickly kind of talk through three kind of key or quick highlights for each of those areas to give you a sense of where I'm coming from as we kind of open it up for questions. So first, from a digital strategy standpoint, so I spent a good part of last year helping our new digital manufacturing organization shape the strategy in partnership with our business colleagues. And the first point I wanted to mention here is really digital should enable the overarching business strategy. So one thing that we like to focus on is there's really only one true strategy, which is the business strategy, and digital is really positioned to enable that. I've seen sometimes in the past where organizations have tried to create like a separate digital strategy and approach and trying to focus on how do we get the best, AI ML tech stack in place without kind of understanding how does digital position itself to really enable that business strategy that you're going after. That kind of leads to the second point, which is getting clarity on the business challenges that are worth pursuing. So a lot of the time we spent last year was trying to understand what products are most critical, what manufacturing sites are most critical, how do we really prioritize what choices we're going to make from a business standpoint and get really clear on what are the challenges that we want to go after. That way, from an AI standpoint or digital standpoint, you're kind of positioning yourselves to go after that. And I think one thing that's been really helpful for us is setting really clear challenge statements and target conditions from a business standpoint that have associated KPIs that really focus the team to kind of go after them. So actually reducing touch time by a certain percentage for a particular process or reducing expense for a certain clarity on a particular expense area. So getting really clear on those business challenges and having AI and digital enable that is really helpful. The last point under strategy actually ties back to what Mike was saying, which is the foundational elements are really non-negotiable, or they should be. I think a lot of times organizations get hung up, and we've had challenges with this as well, around should we be investing in our cloud migration journey? Should we be investing in master data? And it's hard to calculate a direct ROI on those foundational elements, even though we know they're required to get to all the AI value that we know is there. So one thing that we've tried to do is separate and distinguish between what are the foundational items that we know we need to do that aren't going to have direct ROI from a business standpoint directly, and then what are the things that are more tied to the actual value drivers from an application standpoint. And master data and we have a large cloud kind of migration effort that's underway are definitely tied to that. The second part of my role is more on the AI use cases and product delivery. So the first point that I want to mention here is really try to start with a purpose, and this kind of came up in the strategy session as well. I think sometimes I've seen some folks, even within our organization, trying to kind of hunt and search for the perfect AI use case rather than kind of understanding, again, what's the business strategy first, and then how do you position AI to kind of go after that. Last year, in partnership with Gavs, we went after a certain area in the logistics space around air to ocean and trying to convert more of our shipments to ocean. So rather than trying to apply AI, what we did was try to understand what's the business challenge worth going after first, and then understand how we can leverage kind of technology, et cetera. So really starting with that purpose. The second point here is around getting clarity on the vision of the application or the use case that you're going after. So we like to use Amazon's working backwards approach here. So they have, if you're familiar with their press release kind of process, but we go through the process for each of our applications to understand who's the user and customer, what's the pain point and opportunity, how do we know that it's a pain point and opportunity, what's the benefit, and what will that user experience look like. So going through that up front really makes you kind of focus on who's the specific user of this and how do we know we can drive value for that user has been really helpful. The last point here is around agile development, which I know has been kind of a buzzword out there for a while, but it does work and has been effective for us in building applications and solutions for internal users across the network. So when you can combine the actual business users who are going to be leveraging the solution and the subject matter experts with the really robust development team, and you can quickly understand how you iterate quickly and going from a small MVP to a product at scale, it is truly helpful. But it's really key that users are at the kind of center of that. So with that, Vinod, I'll hand it back to you.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Just a reminder to the attendees, feel free to drop in your questions on the chat box. We'll pick it up. My first question is actually going to be to Mike. Mike, you talked about the importance of data, and I like the concept of the augmented intelligence and data provenance more over data. Now, the question that came up was like, when you're talking about data and its importance as the underlying asset that powers processes, whether it's manual or automated, what steps, coming back to your actual experience in Embecta, what steps are you taking to address this within your organization?
Yeah, sure. And obviously, I think Joe and I can probably complete each other's sentences on this, because before this meeting, I also was with our executive operating team, going through a budget exercise where, once again, data governance and archiving, we're coming into question as to, what, when, and how much we should be spending on that. So, I sometimes feel like a broken record over the past 5 years or so, but first you've got to create and protect your data governance strategy. Even if you need to call it something else, because people are tired of hearing it called a data governance strategy. But in my experience, the first two things to get cut or reduced are, in the data analytics domain, are typically governance and archiving. And I think if I heard Joe correctly, I think he mentioned both of those as well, which is, which means there's many other people on this webinar that are probably shaking their heads going, yep, that's right. But the further we go and the further we advance, the more you just cannot let that happen. And what we've found is the best way to make the case is to provide real instances, real examples to your executive team, not only your executive team, but your line managers that are dealing with this every day. and show them, where the lack of data control or completeness or accuracy has a real negative impact on what they're doing. Because if you stay in the theoretical and you talk about what could happen, that's what erodes the business case around governance. If you can point to specific examples, and unfortunately, some of the best ones are the ones where the business or your customers felt a lot of pain, then those are the ones that actually resonate. Even in my circumstance, in Becta's circumstance as a greenfield spinoff, there's always cost pressure not to overbuild our systems and processes, right? I mean, we started with essentially a blank canvas. So, again, we tried to be as purposeful as we could, working with partners like Gavs, to build the right back-end infrastructure and not overbuild, but also build for the future. And this is an area, where we've injected, certain tenets of governance and data control into that model so that it became built as part of the core. At the end of the day, this has to be part of your backbone. Data governance and data, control shouldn't be seen as, an add-on to, to your tech stack. It should be seen as a foundational part of your tech stack.
Mike, I had another question, but a very interesting question from the audience. I can't hold this back.
Okay.
It is, and I think it's kind of linked to the concept of generative data. So I think that's where it's coming from, and it's a data-related question. The question is it possible to generate required data from sample data, and does this approach work in the manufacturing domain?
Yeah, I mean, and I am by far not an expert in this area at all. But one of the things I was going to talk a bit about later was, one of my overarching concerns, which is just that, generating, it's almost a circular reference in my mind, generating data for data's sake. I actually get fairly concerned about, what I believe is a new arena for cyber attack, which is not data corruption, it's data alteration. Meaning that you're creating variations in data that seem so similar to the real thing that your technology is actually not going to catch it. So, it's a great question. I think again we're at an absolute infancy in looking at doing that, and my fear is that if we jump, jump to that without really understanding the upstream and downstream controls that you need to have in place, you could actually be generating data that, even to the human eye looks maybe not accurate, but looks recognizable, and be using it for purposes that ultimately can hurt your business.
And Joe, what are your thoughts on that? I'm just going back to some of the, there are definitely AI related projects we kickstarted, but I'm just going to the concept of testing. Probably is this a good way to, as part of the testing process to, create test data, and what are your thoughts on the same question?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. So, obviously you can create synthetic data for the purpose of building out machine learning models. I think in the manufacturing space, especially within our industry, given some of the GMP considerations, it's concerning a little bit. It's hard to say, yes, we should definitely be creating kind of synthetic data for the purpose of like understanding how the business operates. I mean, I think there probably are cases where you can generate data to train models that you can then test on like, actual data within the organization. And depending on the decisions and actions you're influencing, again, back to the GMP point, you can probably be okay. So it's probably a little use case dependent, but I would say, especially in our industry, it might be a bit tricky to try to use that extensively for AI use cases.
Yeah, I think the subtlety of the variations is, I think, what is kind of most concerning, right? And again, we're getting to the point now where, in the past, if you had a skilled human resource that was very familiar with the data, they could spot the outliers fairly quickly because they had the context and they worked in the data every day. Now we're getting to the point where we're generating, volumes more of data, kind of back to my comment around that data growth versus data quality curve, that I'm waiting for somebody to produce so we can use it. The volume is so is so rapid, the volume increase is so rapid, and I think the subtle changes in data, it's making it very hard for even very skilled humans to kind of eyeball something and say, no, that looks roughly right. We can run with that.
Interesting. I had a follow-on question, and on, when you talked about data readiness and data quality, Mike, probably this is a question to you. What is your preference? In terms of data readiness and data quality, do you prefer an enterprise-wide focus on this, or do you like to pick on specific value chain components, whether you want to focus on inventory or manufacturing or quality control? What is your preferred approach?
Yeah, so I do think it matters on on your company's scale and how they're staffing and how maybe complex and your processes are, whether they're complex due to geography or complex due to your customer base. But as I mentioned before, I getting down to specific use cases that have broader applicability once you've proved them out, to me is the best approach in the way I would drive.
Got it. And I think there's a general question. I don't know who wants to pick this up, but there's another question. Again, it's related to data. There's quite a few questions. I think you opened up the hornet's nest, Mike, here. There's another question that's come up on, data. The question is, are there any applications that are ready, like product-based applications ready to maintain data quality, or even do a data cleansing activity? That's the question.
Yeah, I can well, I would say there's probably more tools out there right now that are production ready for kind of maintaining governance around data quality or completeness and accuracy. I do think well, there certainly are some tools that I'm starting to read about that are proclaiming to be able to actually help you go through the cleansing process. But again, it all kind of comes back to how you're teaching that engine to actually and what you're teaching it to actually recognize, right? Being able to train it. And this is kind of where prompt engineering comes in, I think, big time, right? It's a different animal than it used to be sitting with, let's say, a traditional data management, data governance team, where you could have a group of individuals in the room and have a very robust dialogue about how you were going to go about cleansing, what to look for, et cetera. Once you start relying on the tools, now you basically have to engineer all of those prompts and context to ensure that the tool is actually producing what you want. Now, the promise, of course, is once you get there and you do all the upfront work, these tools can run and with a high level of consistency and speed and efficiency at which they'll do what typically was human work. But I think the upfront investment in getting that right, and then the ability to control and keep the consistent output from these tools is what, to me, I think is why, again, a lot of this stuff is still at the top of the hype cycle, because it hasn't really been proven yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and we have some team members exploring kind of some of these solutions. I don't know exactly where that stands at the moment, but given that data quality is an important challenge, I think we're trying to understand how can we leverage other technology and automation to kind of help us there. My most recent initiative has given me a bit of a different perspective on this at times too. So right now we're building out a new set of dashboards and applications to help our business kind of track performance in real time at sites and across the network. So as we do that, we're getting clarity on what are the data points and KPIs that matter, and then focus on kind of radical transparency of those metrics. And what's interesting about that effort is people get very, very concerned when they start to realize, oh, wow, my data is going to be, my performance, my KPI, my data is going to be shared transparently across your organization. And there's an urge to want to test every single data point before that's shown, which is just like not going to be feasible. So we're trying to get leaders comfortable with saying, hey, the only way we're going to know how we're performing and some of the data quality issues is by transparently sharing that data with people, which is a very different mindset than what has been done in the past, where people, leaders are very used to taking data from a system, putting in a PowerPoint slide, like modifying it based on what is happening, and then sharing it. So there's like a step where you kind of can do the data quality check kind of outside the system. So that radical transparency we're hoping can at least make visible where the challenges are, and that way we can address them. And automation technology would make that a lot more efficient, which is why we're exploring it.
Interesting, Joe. I mean, the two aspects to this, right? One, when we're talking about data that's already existing in the organization of the systems, we're talking about, a little level of transparency and, sharing it across the organization, and of course the quality. I'm also looking at the data that, when there is an AI system, it's also a decision support system. It's more than a decision support system. It's actually going to take the decisions on a behalf, as I all kept saying, with AI in its full form. Humans are not going to take decisions. They're going to intervene for, overriding some decisions when the system comes in. Well, I'm talking about trust of this is about not about existing data, but what data and decision points these AI-based systems are going to produce. Is there a trust deficit, or especially in the beginning of this whole, phase of using AI? Is there some kind of is there a trust deficit that exists with stakeholders of concepts in terms of AI is still a black box, right? Because you can't transparently see how it's using data and how the algorithms work. So is there a trust deficit? And if there is one, is that going to be an adoption challenge, moving from proofs of concept into actual, real world or real business operations adoption?
Yeah, I can maybe start with that one, just get based on some of the AI application that we built last year in the logistics space. So there definitely is a challenge with trust, especially for, when you have employees that are used to using their intuition, talking to other kind of employees, kind of make those decisions. When you shift from that to an algorithm kind of getting involved, there's definitely some trust issues. One thing we try to do to combat that a little bit is giving users the ability, or our employees the ability, to modify the recommendation by the AI system. So rather than running the model saying, okay, this is a decision that the AI is taking, it spits out a recommendation saying, okay, based on the data, based on the constraints that we are aware of, here's the recommended decision and why we kind of made that decision. And then that leads to, in the meetings where these decisions are being made, in this case, in the logistics area, they're having the conversation like, okay, why did the algorithm recommend this? What data exists to kind of support that? So rather than having it be an intuition-based decision and an emotional decision, which it was in the past, now you're leveraging the algorithm, combining it with the intuition, to Mike's point, to drive decisions. So, because trust, I think if we tried to shift directly from, employees to only AI making the decision, it would have been like too big of a leap, which is why we have this humans combined with algorithms to make decisions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Joe more, and I would say it's sort of as I think about this, it's sort of maybe where I was with RPA maybe 5 years ago, right? You started bringing in some tools for robotic process automation. You created these virtual workers. The humans were very skeptical about the output from the virtual workers. But I would say with RPA, and then what I would say basic AI is eventually, though, and to Joe's point, kind of using strategy like his, you can get people comfortable with the output because the algorithm is it has a defined beginning or an end. I think where the trust factor is taking another dip now, and part of this is just the newness of Gen AI, and then just the prospect of the fact that Gen AI, by its very definition, becomes a progressive algorithm, right? You give it a starting point, but then it takes off from there, and it basically creates its own permutations of those algorithms. So there's, well, I will say it's perceived, but it's real. There is a real loss of control over sort of the basic algorithm, right? You use an AI engine enough, let's say you're using it for something simple like internal user PC support, right? you throw enough questions at it, even the human's going to start to predict what the AI is going to come back with, because it's a pretty standard algorithm and it's not necessarily progressive. You start having the technology think on its own and creating, new answers or new responses. That's when, that's that next level of trust dip, because now all of a sudden it's not the human that's actually making the change to what the output could be, it's the engine itself.
Yes, I completely agree, Mike. And it's interesting. I used to do RPA work a couple of years ago, so makes a lot of sense. I think that's why cautiously optimistic about Gen AI use cases. I think they're definitely out there, and especially in terms of like employee productivity, there's a massive amount of opportunity there. But I think it so concerns me at times where if we're going to go completely to Gen AI use cases, especially within our domain, because I listen to a lot of tech podcasts, and one recently was mentioning how even with ChatGPT, like 25% of the time it's giving you answers that might not be factually correct. So you do have to like fact check, ChatGPT, which is, leading the pack right now in terms of large language models. So I think there's definitely use cases out there, but there's still, some things that we have to be concerned about and a bit cautious about.
Yeah. And I would say, to kind of draw some parallels, I was thinking about this last night. Think about blockchain, right? So, and believe it or not, like we're coming up on 15 years, right? That blockchain's been out there. And again, we can probably go back and look at kind of where it was on the hype cycle. I think it's sort of in the trough right now. Because after 15 years, and I'll speak, from life sciences and healthcare, right? There were many, many, use cases being thrown out there around, where blockchain would advance healthcare and life sciences. And I believe, again, just based on what I know and what I read, that the real prevailing use case that's, if you want to call it, being used today is more on the contract side, right? Which to me isn't even really life sciences specific, but it does happen to be an area where I'd say life sciences is using blockchain, on the contract side, and which and it's doing a good job. But let's also remember it was quite an investment in actually bringing that into the industry and figuring out how you could really use it. I mean, I think all of these new technologies, we need to be appropriately, maybe skeptical is not the right word, but appropriately inquisitive about, what the true up and downstream impacts of that particular technology are versus just looking at the actual work that it's going to do.
No, interestingly, you brought out blockchain, Mike, right? Yes, one was contracts, and I remember in manufacturing and supply chain, everyone was talking about how it's going to transform track and trace at that point in time, 7 years or 8 years ago. They said track and trace is going to change, especially in pharma, and right from sourcing to end destination. But as you said, sometimes it tapers down or plateaus out technology as people start trying to adopt that.
Well, it's separating the theory from the execution, right? I mean,
exactly.
I think what we learned with blockchain is it's a pretty significant infrastructure investment, right? To have all of these, basically nodes, synced up, right? I mean, in theory, it'll work and it'll really keep your data consistency straight. But it's quite an investment.
Yeah. But that comes to my next question, Mike, right? Especially since you are responsible for end-to-end IT infrastructure and related activities. When you're looking at new technology and you're trying to adopt it, right, or even evaluating potential adoption, what will always be your safe zone to adopt it or even experiment with it? Will it be to solve a long-standing business problem, or will it be to fine-tune and optimize an existing operation? Or the third option is, will you focus more on trying to see if you can help improve the way your compliance activities are taking place or your reporting functions are?
Yeah, the way I would answer that, and again, this is just my experience and personal, preference, is I would always start with these type of technologies where you believe you already have enough process maturity that it's much easier to identify the true root causes of what the business problem actually is, right? If you start with an immature process, there's so much noise in there that it's sometimes hard to figure out what problem do we really need to solve? So if you start with a process that is, that is pretty mature, and again, if I dig way back to my Six Sigma days, the ideal places, for me to look are processes that we would consider sort of at entitlement, right? And entitlement basically means it's as good as it can get unless you basically apply a step function to it. And I think some of these technologies are the step function that these long-standing, mature processes that are entitlement are. So you understand them very well. You also understand that they have limitations that are driving specific business problems, and you can apply the technology without worrying about a lot of variation or noise around the fact that it's either this technology that is actually going to make that step function improvement or not. So that's, given the choice, I would always start with a mature process.
Joe, I'm going to ask the same question to you in a different way because you actually adopted them in some of the actual business cases. What has been your thought process when you were evaluating what is the in priorities or what is the best area you can even start a proof of concept in?
Yeah, for sure. So, and agree with a lot of what Mike was saying. So one kind of mantra that we use is simplify, standardize, digitize. So when it comes to the process, trying to understand how can we simplify and standardize the process first before we digitize. So I think sometimes, and I've made this, mistake in the past where I jump straight because I'm a digital person, right? I get excited about AI, new technology. I want to jump straight to like, okay, what can we do? I think first understanding kind of what is the business process today, what's actually happening for the people actually doing the work today. So I think starting with that first and having some really good interactive conversations with everyone in the same room, whether it's physical or virtual, so you can kind of get the process out in the open in terms of what are people actually facing today in the same conversation as technologists who are excited to kind of build out these AI or analytical applications. And then you can start to kind of combine it to say, okay, how do we start to simplify the process a little bit? And as we do that, I always look for decision points, because for me, if we're going to layer in intelligence to drive the business, what are those key decision points that exist? And then based on the process, based on those decisions, how do we kind of start to run some experiments and pilots from a tech standpoint to kind of understand how we can build user-friendly applications to support those decisions? And in the past, I think we used to kind of listen to the business at times, understand what the, situation is, and then go have separate conversations on the IT side. It's been really, really helpful for us to have everyone together in the same conversation.
And there's one, I was just thinking that's probably blurring the lines between, business enablement and tech. And, it's almost like, as a team, the lines are blurring. You're not creating silos as a tech function and a business function. I guess that's where it's leading to, Joe.
Yeah, for sure. That's why like our new organization is called the Digital Manufacturing Organization. We basically took the functional IT group, combine it with all the tech and data folks in the business side into one organization. So we do have a bit of a blended organization, and we've tried to educate our business leaders to say, hey, the more we can infuse business into the IT projects, the more successful we'll be.
Yeah, that's definitely the way to go.
There's a very interesting audience question. It says that while we're talking about AI and technology and digital, the landscape, especially manufacturing supply chain, is still having a lot of tech debt. And that's one. And second, you have a lot of legacy systems and which you can't do away with. So how are you going to balance out legacy tech debt with adoption of AI and other technologies?
Hey, Joe, you want to go first then?
Yeah, sure. So we have, Merck's been around for over 125 plus years. So we've been around for a while, have a lot of legacy infrastructure. As I mentioned, we do have a large kind of cloud program that's underway to move a lot of our applications to the cloud. We still have a lot of legacy infrastructure. And I think we've been trying to balance how do we modernize the infrastructure while also kind of extract value along the way. So, for some of the applications that I've been working on, sometimes we're kind of custom building applications, knowing that in the future, we'll be able to leverage some kind of new infrastructure and systems that exist. So we've been trying to understand what are some of the the use cases where we can kind of drive value today while we know that we're still kind of modernizing our infrastructure. Sometimes it can be challenging as we have architecture conversations because we'll put together a solution architecture for a use case, and then the question always comes up of like, okay, we're moving to S4 HANA, we're moving, this system's going to be retired in 2 years. And in some cases, it might make sense not to go after certain opportunities. But if you made that a factor in every use case you were trying to decide, you would never go after any use cases because you always be waiting for the next kind of like modernization activity to take place. So we've been trying to think through, okay, what use cases should we go after while we're still doing the modernization effort? So I think if we waited for all the infrastructure to be quote unquote modern, there's going to be the next kind of, things that are coming in the future. So I think it's always a balance. But Mike, I know you guys are in a bit of a different spot in Embecta, so probably have a different perspective. But obviously at BD, you probably experience similar challenges.
We're probably a lot more similar on this one, Joe. And I was just kind of thinking of how I would answer this. So the diabetes care business within BD, which spun out into Embecta, we've been manufacturing, insulin delivery devices for 100 years. So, and, we brought 3, manufacturing plants with us. So it's a very similar story in terms of while we have some, certainly some modern infrastructure in the plants, and we've actually successfully been able to move, some of the legacy stuff into the cloud, with the help of GAVs and our other partners. It's, still, a lot of work in progress there. And, I guess what I would say is, how do you start to get the adoption of, AI, Gen AI type technologies in the manufacturing arena? And I don't want to forget something that Joe pointed out at the beginning of the webinar, which is, there's a significant amount of necessary GMP, regulations and guidelines to follow. And while I hate to kind of throw regulation up as the reason you can't do anything, you do have to acknowledge what processes you have to follow in order to be producing, whether it's medical devices or pharmaceuticals. So, I would approach kind of the manufacturing arena around data control, right? And making sure that, the company, so management, believes that we have the proper controls in place for our data to thwart, the type of OT cyber risk that I mentioned before. Again, it's particularly important that you have trusted sources of data, especially now if you're talking about impacting data that you're using for production. You can read about these. There's already deep fake designs and specifications floating around, out there in cyberspace. And, quite frankly, the thought again of that sort of data altering type of cyber attack that's difficult to detect is one that would keep me up at night as we sort of forayed into this area in manufacturing. If you could probably run away with some thoughts around how Gen AI, if it doesn't have the exact specific content to recognize data variations that look similar, you could be producing something and sending it out of your 4 walls of your factory that might be at a specification, and it would be long before it was detected. So how do you drive the adoption there? You've got to you have to put data controls in place where management agrees that, hey, if we go after, solving this business problem with Gen AI in the manufacturing arena, we feel very confident that the data that is, going into this platform and coming out of this platform is protected, monitored, and we've got the right controls in place. I think it's very hard to get past step 1 in that environment without reasonable assurance that you've got your data under control.
Sure. There is another question, and interestingly, kind of linked to data. It's on in supply chain. Obviously, there are a lot of partners, be it your sourcing partners or even your logistics partners. And in a collaborative ecosystem, especially with AI and Gen AI having a certain level of independent, the systems getting a little independent, what do you do to safeguard data security?
Joe, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start with this one. Yeah, because we do have a lot of external manufacturers that we partner with, and we have been trying to think through that effort I was talking about earlier. How do we kind of get data from our external partners into kind of understanding the end-to-end performance? So, and the question, Vinod, is more on kind of security
Yeah,
of
it's more
data.
on questions, yeah, especially when you're collaborating with partners, and this is like almost like going on a auto drive mode with AI and Gen AI. How do you think data security is taken safeguarded?
Yeah. So one thing we've tried to do here is, so within our digital strategy, we had different maturity levels for different capabilities in different areas. So, simple scale of say 0 to 100, there's a 30, 70, 100. We also try to apply that thinking to external partners and try to think about kind of who are the strategic partners that we truly want to kind of invest more in from a data standpoint, capability standpoint, et cetera. And then that way, we're not trying to think about, all of these. If we're going to leverage AI, it's going to be done in a very strategic manner where it's with the partners that are strategic, and we have the right conversations in advance of deploying an AI solution. Not that I'm aware of. I'm not super close to that space right now, but we try to kind of think about how do we kind of prioritize those activities so that way we don't end up in a challenging spot where we try to do too much with AI across too many partners. Not saying we don't want to work with all of our partners, but it's just hard to kind of monitor everything. So those where we are investing strategically, we have more data availability, more opportunity for AI solutions. So that has made it a little more palatable for us. That way we're not trying to take it all on at once. So hopefully that helps. I wish I knew more about our EXM external manufacturing space, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, and what I would add to what Joe said was, and again, this may seem like a basic answer, but you do have to go back to the basics, especially when you're dealing with, third-party partners that you rely on, especially in your production space, is, starting with the risk assessment, right? The basics of, how are they protecting their data? Forget about the data that you're exchanging between parties. First and foremost, what are their data protection protocols? Are they ISO 27001 certified, right? You really do have to learn about how they think about their data, because how they think about their data internally really is indicative of how the data that's coming from them. Again, I said it in the beginning, data provenance is key, right? Because it's not all going to be your own data that you're using to generate outcomes from these solutions. In large part, depending on how your business model works, it could be the preponderance of the data could be external, right? So just understanding how each one of those parties deals with that data, and then having the proper monitoring in place when that data exchange is happening to give reasonable assurance that the data, is not being manipulated between parties.
Thanks, Mike. I think we come to the last 5 minutes of the webinar. I'll just probably squeeze in like one last question. I think for me, it sounded like a very complicated question. That in terms of in the space of supply chain, can you use large language models or even visuals to actually analyze and identify inconsistencies in actual use cases, and can it actually contribute to more robust operational framework?
Well, I think Joe's going to have a much.
Yeah, exactly. Be like,
yeah, I mean, in terms of like leveraging machine learning and other kind of advanced analytical techniques in like the broader and understanding kind of discrepancies, opportunities, et cetera. I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity there. We manage a pretty complex global supply chain, and we do a lot of work in this space to try to understand how we do predictive analytics and kind of understand how to leverage things like machine learning to help us identify where there's challenges and to ultimately proactively manage risk. So I think there's definitely opportunity there. I think the large language models question, or part of the question, is a bit more nuanced in that it's like, yes, we can enable chatbot type capabilities for some of the dashboards and solutions that we're building out, but we're not at a point. It's been harder for us to find like very clear large language model use cases in this space, because a lot of it is more around the predictive analytics, which is more kind of inclined to machine learning type use cases than large language models. Not saying they don't exist, but I think any of them that do exist or that we've gone after are also ones that exist in kind of other domains across manufacturing. So we've been doing more with optimization algorithms, predictive analytics, data mining for discrepancies, those sorts of use cases, and less on the kind of LLM side of the house right now.
And what about the visual? I think the second part question is that, while we were talking about data, is AI and Gen AI going to create a completely different kind of data? Not different kind, but is visuals and images going to become more important as data points than what it is right now? Especially when
I mean, potentially. I mean, the other thing I was just thinking about that I probably should have commented on is there's obviously use cases around leveraging large language models to accelerate development from a developer standpoint. So, and we are experimenting with that as well. So then if you can kind of leverage that to kind of generate new visuals in the future. So one part of that is accelerating the development lifecycle or development time to build out applications and kind of do things faster, cheaper, et cetera, because you can leverage things like co-pilots. I think that's definitely an opportunity. And there's definitely an opportunity with leveraging that to kind of visualize things because so I think there are certainly opportunities there.
Yeah, I think we mentioned it a bit before. Testing, is another area, right? All part of the development life cycle, and being able to again generate data for testing and whatnot. And I think kind of where we're leading, especially in our kind of in the life sciences industry, is I think there's going to be much more focus on sort of I'd say the back end, not necessarily the production end, to start figuring out how we can gain efficiencies from implementing some of these technologies. And I can say even internal to Embecta, we've been again we're at the beginning of this, but a lot of the discussions we have is how can we make ourselves internally more efficient before we're turning to AI and Gen AI to say how can we serve our customers better, or how can we improve some of the external things that we're doing. It's let's do some internal use cases first to kind of prove out how this works and keep it in a more controlled environment.
Well, I think we're down to the last minute. We're almost done. Mike, Joe, once again, thank you so much. Can't really know how to thank for joining us, spending your time here on this webinar on our request. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the audience and the attendees who have joined in. Just wanted to let the audience know that we'll be sharing a complimentary ebook on powering AI for supply chain. That's one of our ways of saying thank you for those who took time to join us. Mike, Joe, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful 1 hour speaking on this topic.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks, Vinod, for having us, and thanks for the partnership. It's been a great partnership, and thanks for hosting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care.